All right, let's do some more post-game reviews. I'm going to be covering 4 games here. The first set I want to look at is Spleagles versus Rexy. Just for context, Rexy is a very good all-rounder player. He has very, very good sniping skills. So when you eject this person from their tank, you could be in even more danger than before you destroyed their tank. So you got to watch out for that. Spleagles is a very, very good defensive player. They typically approach the game in a way where they're somewhat vulnerable at the start of the game, but if you let them anchor down, their defense is very, very, very difficult to break. He knows how to use howitzers, and he has a very old school way of playing. Very skilled player. So both players on this map, which is channels, make some pretty significant mistakes that I feel are worth talking about. So let's talk about Spleagles' opener first. So what Spleagles decides to do is build a couple scavengers, a constructor, and this is where he makes the biggest mistake. Like, if he had not done this, Spleagles would have been in a much better position to defend from some of these early attacks from Rex. So what he does is he builds a factory and then takes it with him. Now, the issue with doing this, moving both your factory and recycler at the same time, you cannot spend this scrap. And this scrap is doing nothing to help you at all. So moving both production units simultaneously is something that you should rarely do. What Spleagles could have done is have the factory build units and then immediately recycle it at this silo and then rebuild it at this location, which would effectively teleport it there. Whenever you move your production units, just make sure at least one of them is deployed whenever possible. And I think Rex decides to attack early, mainly as a consequence of Spleagles contesting this plateau. He wants a defensive position, and Rex just happens to see that while he's setting up for this pile of scrap over here. So when Rex sees that, and he sees that Spleagles has literally nothing to work with, he just makes an on-the-spot decision to form up an attack, because he's already in the process of building stuff now. He's already got offense units on their way, and Spleagles is just now getting deployed. So Rex knows that if he pressures now, this could earn him a win in the game. As this transpires, Spleagles does lose his recycler from this exchange. The issue with this attack from Rex, though, is that Spleagles still has he still has his factory, he still has his constructor and a few scavengers, plus a scrap advantage against Rex. So losing your recycler does not mean you lose the game, and Spleagles is an experienced enough player to where they don't panic when they lose their recycler. They basically just, they know how to work without one, and that experience shows in all the games that he plays. So let's look at what Rex did, because Rex's opener is mostly flawless except for one major issue, and this is something that I would like to put in some programming logic to make scavengers like just a smidge smarter. But okay, so Rex does the right thing. He gets this scrap, and then he moves his constructor to build a silo. He could have built it like much closer, though. This silo needed to be like way over here. So, but he builds a silo here, which is good. But there's one little problem with his plan. Where are these scavengers going? Yeah, they don't even know that this silo exists, because every time you build a silo, you have to tell your scavengers to scavenge, or else they won't see that silo while they're dropping off scrap. So Now what happens is that Rex loses 32 units worth of scrap because of this mistake, which means that he's bankrupt by the time he's going on the offensive. So yeah, that's just really unfortunate. But I really feel like this cost him the game, because Spleagles actually ends up getting this scrap and using it against Rex. So it was just, yeah. See, they never even get a chance, and all the scrap gets left on the ground. So now, even though Spleagles doesn't have a recycler, he has way more resources than Rex does, and Spleagles knows that if he doesn't act quickly, his advantage is going to disintegrate. So, Spleagles does the right thing in like getting very aggressive and trying to box Rex in an attempt to just prevent him from getting any more resources. Because, at this point, Spleagles cannot replace scavengers, producers. Without a recycler, you cannot replace those units if your enemy destroys them. So, it's very critical that you punish your opponent as much as possible so that you can capitalize on that resource advantage. This is something that I would like to see more out of Spleagles. Spleagles has lost a number of games as a result of playing too passively. And just from looking at these recordings and reviews, I think he could do a little bit of a better job of analyzing the field and identifying when it is a good time to attack and when it is not. Now, I say that with the caveat, though, that this game is played from a first-person perspective. So it's easy for me to go into a bird's eye view and go, oh, he should have been over here, over here. But it's actually much harder to do that when your vantage point is like first person and, like there's fog to deal with. And you don't know what all those dots on the radar are and until you press the T button and are within range. It can be done. You can know where everything is on the field, but it does take a fair bit of effort to do. So this game generally ends with Rex trying to move to get resources because he's completely broke. But Spleagles just does not relent. And I think Spleagles just overwhelms him with the resource advantage. And I don't think he has any way to build enough, fast enough to get back into the game. Now, it is worth mentioning, though, that Spleagles did leave most of the scrap on the field back here. So Rex could have collected, this is approximately 40 units of scrap, and this is another 40 units of scrap. Although there's no way that Rex would know that this scrap is actually here. That would be difficult to get to as well. But there are, I really feel like players could take advantage of Spleagles' passive gameplay. I think the only threat, if Rex had just parked a bunch of turrets up here, the only threat that Spleagles would be able to present is with the howitzers. He would have to move the howitzers up, wait for them to destroy their targets, and only then would Spleagles, in my opinion, launch a full attack on this plateau position. Any plateau position is really, really difficult for offense units to attack, especially while they're going up the hill here. And the last comment that I have is that Spleagles really needs to embrace turrets and defenses, because we see the lack of variety in his builds here. 15 tanks and 3 scouts, and hardly anything else. So even 2 turrets on the recycler probably would have saved his recycler in the first 4 minutes of the game. A mine layer would have done well too, but I think that mine layer was built a little bit too late in the mix. He didn't have time to have the mine layer, cover this plateau in mines. But Spleagles really does need to work on making sure his recycler is secured. There's no excuses anymore. Like, recyclers are beefier in the strat balance patch than they used to be. So they used to be even easier to kill before now. So yeah, we need to. He needs to at least put 2 turrets. You know, that can make the difference between having a recycler and not having one for the price of 12 scrap. I think it's worth it. All right, let's move on to the next game. This is also Rex versus Spleagles. This is one of the most remarkable games that I've ever seen. Because like the previous match, Spleagles loses his recycler in the first 3 minutes of the game. You would never guess that the game would go on for like over an hour. And let's look at these stats here, because it just blows my mind what Spleagles was able to do with so little. Okay, so we see here that Spleagles survives for an entire hour with 5 scavengers. That's at 1 constructor and 1 factory, and we see that Rex has like almost 60 scavengers, 8 factories. It's so ridiculous. But I think that goes to tell you like how skilled of a defensive player Spleagles is when you give him the time to get established in the map. Once Spleagles locks down, like, their defense is incredibly tough to break. Again, we see the issue of Spleagles not covering his recycler when he needs to give himself some distance from it. And of course, he pays for that. Now, the only reason that Rex decided to attack the recycler is because he also, I don't think Spleagles was intending to contest mid. I think Spleagles basically just wanted the high ground. So he had no intention of getting the scrap in the middle of the map. You know, he was going towards the edges. But the issue is that when Rex goes here to try and get the middle of the scrap, he sees that recycler sitting all by itself. And the Black Dog tanks are like, they have incredible ammo efficiency compared to the other factions. So there is basically nothing stopping him from just running up to the recycler and trashing it. This is what costs Spleagles the recycler at the beginning of the game. Like, he cannot go towards the middle of the map, distance himself from the recycler, and expect his recycler to not be attacked. You know, it's a great way to lose important production units that you cannot replace. The game is not over. You know, Spleagles has a factory, and he has a constructor. This constructor is the most important target for Rex to try and take down, because if Spleagles does not have this constructor, he cannot build pilots. If he can't build pilots, this factory of his is completely worthless. So the only reason that I feel that this game went on for so long is because I don't feel that Rex was doing a good enough job in using the tools of the game to you know, take out key targets. So the game has what is called a red field, and the red field removes you from radar, and it makes it so that the only way that a player can spot you is visually. And this map does have a number of ways that you could go around undetected to try and break this fortification that Spleagles ends up making. So what Rex needed to do was identify where the constructor was, and like, he needed to either get into a Red Devil tank because he was playing as Black Dog, or a Bobcat. The constructor is extremely vulnerable to Hornets. They lock on almost instantly because this unit generates a lot of heat. And there's like, if you get within 200 meters, there's virtually no way to defend your constructor against that. Like, you have to preemptively stop the player from getting to it. in order to keep your constructor from getting destroyed by a player who is targeting it. What he needed to do was to find an opportunity to fool Spleagles into thinking that he's still with his army. And then what he needed to do was go solo. You can navigate around these mines. And he needed to find an opportunity to snipe that constructor down. Like that should have been like priority number 1. Priority 2, of course, is destroying the scavengers, which again, Spleagles can't replace those. He has no recycler to replace them with. That's pretty much the gist of this game in general. Like just needing to pick targets rather than fighting the army, because Spleagles can replace these tanks. Rex needed to focus on the things that Spleagles could not replace. And unfortunately, Spleagles was really he was really doing a good job with keeping his scavengers safe and making sure that they're like always by hangars whenever they're not picking up scrap. Still, though, I think Spleagles could have done even more to protect himself from Rex here. What he needed to do was get some gun towers back here, because the reason why you need gun towers is because if Rex did try to use the red field, like these mines aren't going to stop a player from cutting through them and picking off a key target. So if there was even like one gun tower here, or two, it would be incredibly difficult for a player to do a flank back here, find the constructor, and blow it up. Like destroying this unit would have ended the game for Spleagles, even despite the fact that he had 100 scrap. That's how important that unit is. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that building structures when you can't replace your constructor, it becomes a very dangerous proposition. So it would actually be extremely risky, for example, to build gun towers here, because your constructor is tied up for 12 seconds while your constructor is building at a minimum of 12 seconds, usually 18 seconds. I would have actually started by building gun towers back here, to prevent flanks, and just kind of creeping those gun towers up so that he has like a very secure area for the constructor, so that he didn't have to risk losing it. So the TLDR of it is that Rex needs to work on picking key targets in a game to cripple their opponent, even further in this case. And Spleagles needs to really work on their early defense game. They need to be ready for rushing and early game punishments. So there's that. Let's move on to the next set of games. And that is going to be, I actually played these games with Piercing. So we played a set of 3 games, and it was a really close matchup. So again, for context, I am kind of like I'm more of a defensive player, kind of like Spleagles, but I do have a bit more offense in my play style than Spleagles does. So I'm less likely to use howitzers as my main offensive tool, and I'm not below using like quote off meta tactics, and I've actually developed a few of my own, which a lot of players actually use now. So I'm kind of proud of that. Piercing, on the other hand, is a very offensive player. He is very, very good at pressuring his opponents relentlessly. I would say that he specializes in trickery and distraction tactics, and just fooling the player in whatever way that he possibly can. And he's really freaking good at it. So there's a lot that you have to watch out for when you're playing against this player. I'm just saying. So let's look at our first game. And I kind of apologize for this one. What I was looking for in all of these games was positional advantage. because I knew that like Piercing would try to pressure me very, very early in every single game. I had to balance between giving up a large portion of the map and surviving long enough to put up a fight. And that's pretty much what I do here. And so now this game was pretty dull until the very end, unfortunately, because I played like very, very passively. So we actually see here, this is the map on Paranoia, and Piercing immediately goes to the middle of the map and just starts taking scrap away from the field. So he starts the game with a huge resource advantage, and I know I'm in the green here. I know that in order to survive, I have to basically just get the bare minimum scrap required to be able to defend myself, and then I could try to force him to fight in a corner position, which gets a huge advantage as the defender. I actually think it's kind of a broken element of this map in retrospect. So, because the defender gets 2 geysers to work with, and the attacker only gets 1, and this 1 geyser is not very good. There's less build space, and you can easily get flanked, whereas in the corner, it's not nearly as easy. So I focus on taking the lower left and the lower right corners. And fortunately, Piercing doesn't pressure me too much, and I have an army which is optimized towards his very heavy use of light units. Piercing often plays as Black Dog, and he primarily builds scouts and light tanks for the most part. Like, these are always going to be his top units. So by building APCs, which these units heavily punish units that do not have explosives or splash damage. So I just went APC heavy for this game. And when Piercing came over to try and break my corner position, he does make a mistake here. So at this point in the game, all of the scrap is gone. There's not a single fragment of scrap anywhere on the map. So whatever drops here, whatever drops in this area, is the only resources available. Piercing has 5 scrap to work with. He can build exactly 1 silo, and if he loses that silo, he loses, which he does. But in my opinion, he needed to build a silo like back here. He just needed some kind of presence where his scavengers could pick up scrap immediately after destroying my stuff. I do think that these 2 howitzers over here, which they're kind of covered by this gun tower, and so I had these howitzers softening up his army as it was clustered, trying to form up an attack. The howitzers are a good counter to turrets, which he also likes to use to lock down whatever he destroys. It's just the issue is that I have all these APCs, and none of Piercing's units are good for that. He only has 1 rocket tank, which again, for Black Dogs, they are equipped with dual rocket bombs, but this is the only explosive unit he has on the field. So these APCs, with all these soldiers, like as soon as that rocket tank goes down, Piercing is in serious trouble, because these turrets are not going to stand up to these soldiers, and like it's just, and also he doesn't have a silo for these scavengers to deposit scrap into, so he can't build anything for the entire duration of this fight. Whereas my scavengers are able to get scrap to the recycler right away, and I can just build as I get scrap to do so. So these turrets also needed to be moved up a little bit more, but I really don't think that would have helped anyways. just because, again, I have all these APCs, and you know, as long as they can deploy their soldiers, they will trash turrets and non-explosive units quite nicely. So, you know, this was just a matter of I think Piercing would have stood a better chance if he just made absolutely sure that there was like a silo, like at least back here. I did have these howitzers, and like if he built a silo like anywhere in this area, I would have used those howitzers to take it down. But he could have built a silo like somewhere around here, and I really think that if he had left enough scrap for himself to build like a hangar and silo, or a hangar and a supply, then some of these damaged units, like the scout here, would have been able to be recovered, and yeah, I think Piercing would have just stood a better chance. He has less experience breaking like siege setups like this, where you have to kind of siege this in order to break through those defenses. So that's pretty much it. Not really much to this game other than that. Let's move on to the next game. This game kind of illustrates Piercing's distraction tactics quite well. So Piercing is in green in this map. I really think what he does here is quite brilliant. So what he does is he starts the game with the standard opener. He gets all the he immediately goes to mid scrap because he knows that I cannot contest this. He is just too strong of a fighter for me to be able to stand up to him. And the early Black Dog units are incredibly strong anyways, so if I decided to fight here early in the game, I would have just lost straight away. So he knows I can't contest that. I'm not skilled enough. So, but he goes ahead and collects mid scrap, and he immediately starts building a defensive line. I'll actually draw it here. He covers this entire area with gun towers, and what that allows him to do is force me to play a siege game. So I was like, okay, well, as long as because I have howitzers, I'm ready for gun towers and turrets. But the issue is that despite having like some defenses on my recycler, he takes everything that he has, all the turrets and all the tanks. He has 10 light tanks. He builds nothing but light tanks in this game, pretty much. And he decides to pull off a flank attack while I'm trying to, like, I'm chipping away at this front line. And I have a very solid defensive setup here. I even have turrets covering the front line. So, you know, this position very, very heavily favors me. But the problem is, I don't have a whole lot back here. I have a maximum of 3 turrets, ideally positioned to protect the recycler. And unfortunately, I really needed these turrets up here. I failed to make sure that my turrets were evenly spread out. So, you know, my recycler has some defenses, but it is weakly defended. So... And these light tanks are extremely fast too. They are about they travel at about 15 meters per second faster than a standard tank. So these light tanks are able to keep up with him quite easily, and they pretty much outrun me. Like, I can't even catch up to these things. And I'm trying to pick away at these light tanks as much as possible. My tank's equipped with dual SP stabbers. But I just don't quite make it there in time. I did think that my turrets would have put up a little bit of a better fight here, but this is like a really solid attack by Piercing, and he basically splits up his army, forces me to split up my army and deal with these light tanks here. He has all these turrets cleaning up my offense units. And he manages to break through the turret defensive line, and that's the end of my recycler there. He simultaneously destroys my recycler and the factory at the same time. So the issue there is that if I still had my factory, I could have won this game, but I didn't. So now I have to play the rest of the game with like just a bunch of turrets and nothing else, and that was game over for me. So this is a good demonstration of picking your key targets. So what Piercing does here is he ignores this entirely. He's like, I'm not going to fight that. So he has a really strong defensive line with gun towers. So even if I wanted to like push my offensive units towards his producers, I still would have lost a lot in the process. He doesn't have a whole lot of defenses back here, but I would still have to try and push through these gun towers. I think the most I could have done here is like a production unit trade, and he would have won that exchange too, because he, like, after all this fighting is done, he still has a lot more than I do. So, I just need to work on making sure that my recycler, that the turrets around my recycler are just more evenly distributed. I've complained about other players doing this before, but this kind of makes me a hypocrite. So, oh well, I have to, I'm not a perfect player either. So yeah, I can't just build turrets. I have to position them after they're built. So our third match took place on Felix Venus, and this is an interesting map. It's a little bit lopsided in terms of balance in some ways, but overall I quite like this map. It gives both players plenty of resources to work with out the gate, and I think what Piercing's plan was, Piercing planned to box me into this area. I'm the green player here. And if he had successfully managed to do this, I would have had to fight this game with only 120 scrap, and that's really tough to do on a map like this, because the rest of the map has like 260-ish scrap, and if Piercing had collected all of that, he would have been able to send 3 attack waves to me, and like I don't think I'd be able to defend against that. So. Now let's look at Piercing's opener first, because there's a lot of areas where I think, at least from this position, he needs to rethink how he sets things up. So the first mistake that he makes is that he places the silo far away from the scrap. He easily adds 2 to 3 minutes to the collection time for these 2 scavengers, because of how far they have to travel to drop off, and that was not necessary. He probably should have put it right there. And another thing to consider is that even though I know Piercing wanted to control the middle of the map right away, he's giving up quite a lot to do that. So there's roughly 120 units worth of scrap on this side of the map. So with Piercing giving up this side of the map, he is also giving up practically guaranteed scrap that is extremely hard for any opponent spawning on the opposite side of the map to contest. It would take forever. Like, by the time I got a scout down here to try and destroy this stuff, all the scrap would have been gone. So he rushes to the western part of the map. And because he doesn't drop a factory before moving, any scrap that Piercing collects is unusable. So he has scrap in the bank that he can't use while he's moving there. So building that factory first can really save you a lot of time, even if it takes you slightly longer to get your recycler and your tank into the middle of the map. And one other thing that I think that he does that I don't agree with is that I get that he wants to try and deny me all the scrap that he can from my side of the map, but and I've seen other players make this mistake too. Is that there's only 40 units of scrap here. This isn't much relative to what else is on the map. So putting a silo here and attempting to deny this scrap from me is not really helping piercing much. Like, it would have been much more efficient to build a silo to make sure that, you know, scavengers get to this scrap as quickly as possible so that I can't even touch it, because this is a lot of scrap to work with. So yeah, but he does order the constructor to go over here, and that also ties up the constructor for a really long time. Like this is at least 3 minutes where he can't use his constructor to build this silo, and there isn't even any scabs here to collect from this area when this silo is built. So it just sits there doing nothing for a long time. It's doing nothing to help piercing become more of a presence. Because he had to take the extra time to do all that stuff, by the time he starts challenging the what I call the prime geyser spot, I'm already ready to defend that area and take it for myself. You know, piercing doesn't have a whole lot of strong offense to work with, so and I do. So yeah, that was kind of fortunate for me, because if he had kind of optimized his opener a little bit more, I think that could have been a loss for me if he was ready for me to deploy there. But I'm really glad I did make that decision to move to the east side of the map instead of try to collect the scrap over here. Like, that's one of the several things that I feel saved me in this game. So yeah, it was just a really inefficient opener on Piercing's part, and he needs to weigh the consequences of ignoring all this scrap against what he's trying to do to his opponent. So let's take a look at what I do here. So again, just like with the other maps, you know, I was seeking positional advantage. I have to use the terrain in order to win games in a lot of cases. Choosing where to fight is almost as important as deciding which offense units to build. And we see that I make sure that the factory is built before I decide to move the recycler. Okay. So I can build the entire time while it's traveling to its destination, which I do. And you know, I just have this one silo. I don't need all of this scrap right away. So it's okay that this silo is not right next to this scrap. So I do get all of this, fortunately. Piercing really could have crippled my economy game if he had pushed in a little bit further. But I don't think he would have known that I was going to move east, because I think he was expecting me to stay in this corner and try to play defensively. Another important thing that I do is I build the armory right away. So I don't typically do this, but I know that Piercing uses lots and lots of turrets in his lineup, and I didn't want to stick with APCs this time around because I just don't feel like they would be flexible and fast enough on this particular map to get the full value out of them. So I decided to arm myself with dual SP stabbers and a phantom device, which I pretty much use the entire game. The phantom device makes you invulnerable to hornets and shadowers. So because Piercing likes to use those scouts and you know, every light tank that he jumps in, he's going to spam me with hornets, I figured I would just equip that item instead of a thumper, and it really worked out well for me. Like, I was able to trash all of the turrets that he put onto the battlefield trying to control this map. You know, and because Piercing's constructor was tied up for so long, and I think at this point, yeah, it's still way over here. He's desperate for pilots, and his constructor is not in a position to be able to replace them. So he ends up having to recycle his factory a couple of times in order to restore the pilots, which means that he doesn't have any structures to work with. He really needed a silo out here to get this scrap off the field as quickly as possible. And I did total. I think this was like all the scavengers he had. Yeah, that's all of them. So I basically wiped out all of his scavengers in this attack that I did early in the game. And I think the only reason Piercing's tanks are just sitting here instead of defending those scavengers is because I took a life off of them. If you get killed in this game, it can be a huge upset because there's Piercing right there, and you know, if you die trying to snipe a tank, or if you get like blown to bits, you spawn in a different part of the map, and if you don't have a comsat ready, you can't control your units properly. So he died right here, and now he's going to spawn all the way across the map. Yeah, he's way back here, so he can't command any of his units to defend anything coherently. So I basically just take this chance to just wipe out all of his resources, and there's not really much you can do about it. I mean, he could blindly set his light tanks to hunt, but you know, like I would be able to easily bait them and defeat them with this composition. He follows this up by trying to lock down the entire map with turrets, which I think is a good idea, except for the fact that, like, again, the only reason I got those dual SP stabbers was to deal with these turrets specifically. So I spent a lot of time, you know, having my units protect me while I basically just went from turret to turret, sniping them, trying to make sure that they weren't harassing my scavengers. And it worked out. So, you know, that was one of the very few times where I was actually glad that I wasted the scrap to upgrade my tank, because usually I get my ass kicked. One thing that I don't feel like this replay communicates very well was how important the armory was in my victory. The armory did a lot of work in this game because Piercing was building so many tanky units and so many turrets, and I had so much stuff to fire at. You know, I constantly needed ammo and repairs, and I don't think the hangar and supply would have been able to keep up with that. So, you know, I'm going to try to incorporate the armory more into my regular gameplay, even though I'm not really known for direct combat. So, that's essentially it about this game. It is mainly that I just had a better presence on the map after that first skirmish, and you know, Piercing's turret plays were good, but that alone wasn't enough to keep me off the field. And I was trying to be really good about making sure that his scavengers didn't get anything. And I think that shows, because that's not a lot of scrap to work with. And we actually see that in the charts too at some point. So we can see where that scrap denial comes into play around this area. Overall, these were some really exciting games. I'm glad that we have a nice little tournament going on. And yeah, that's about it. Have a good one.